All right. Hello, everyone. So we're going to be looking at D3.1. This is related to sexual reproduction in plants, which is part of a bigger unit just related to sexual reproduction. And we want to be thinking about how do plants reproduce sexually, and we want to be thinking about continuity and change. So genetic transfer, also how are they increasing genetic variability? So sexual reproduction in plants, we have flowering plants producing male and female gametes through the process of meiosis. Meiosis is making sex cells. And then fertilization is going to happen between pollen, which is produced at the anther here on this filament. So this here, the stamen, the anther, and the filament is the male reproductive organ in a flowering plant. And then the carpel, stigma, style, and ovary. The sticky stigma is going to attach pollen. Then the pollen is going to move down the style and it'll go into the ovary, which is filled with ovules, and fertilize them. And then those ovules will become seeds and the ovary will become a fruit. So this structure here, the stigma, style, ovary, and ovules, is all the carpel. So when an embryo develops, it's going to produce a fruit, and those seeds inside are going to be dispersed when they are fully formed. Ovules are going to contain ovaries are going to contain multiple ovules. Ovule cells grow large and divide by meiosis to produce 4 haploid nuclei. Then they go through one round of mitosis to have 8 haploid nuclei. One of them is fertilized, and the other 7 are going to help with the development of that fertilized ovule. Diploid cells in the anther are going to divide by meiosis to produce 4 haploid cells. And then each of these is going to develop into a pollen grain. The nucleus in a pollen grain divides by mitosis to produce 3 haploid nuclei and 2 male gametes and 1 that helps with pollen development and fertilization. So the process of meiosis is something that we're going to look at later, but we do need to know that meiosis is a critical process in the development of gametes. And so what we should know here is the different structures on a flowering plant like this, a flower, and we should know their functions. So we should be able to draw like a cross section of a flower in this way. So when we're looking at fertilization here, pollination is the transfer of pollen from the anther to a stigma via wind or animal. So for example, insects. And the pollen is going to stick to the stigma. From each pollen grain, a pollen tube grows through the style until it reaches the ovary, then onwards to an ovule. Then it releases the gamete, the male gamete, into the ovule that has the female nuclei. And this produces a zygote, which will develop into an embryo with an embryo root, shoot, and 2 leaves. So essentially a seed that can sprout into a plant. Flowers may have male and female parts, so they will often be hermaphroditic, but they're producing gametes through meiosis, so it is sexual reproduction. There's going to be genetic variation in their gametes, but they don't want to be self-pollinating because their own genetics are still going to be pretty similar, even if there are variations. So plants have strategies so they're not self-pollinating and promoting genetic differences. So what kind of strategies do they have to promote genetic variance? This is related to preventing inbreeding. Inbreeding depression. I mean, obviously you'd be depressed if you were inbreeding, but inbreeding depression, they want to prevent that. So inbreeding depression leads to early death, failure to thrive, infertility. So none of that is anything that we want to be keeping around. But to promote genetic diversity, we're going to have on flowers, they might have separate male and female structures on different flowers in the same plant. They might have separate male-female structures on different flowers on different plants. So you might have trees that are male and trees that are female. But typically what's going on is that the anther is maturing first and then later the stigma matures. And in the incidence of self-pollination, the pollen tube will often not grow because of self-incompatibility. So we can see that in this image up here. So it works like the immune system in reverse. It recognizes self cells. So it's saying these cells are the same as mine. So this process cannot occur. And this prevention of self-pollination has actually arisen many times. So what's going on here is that you can see the different genes that are being detected. So if the gamete combo in the plant is S1, S2, then S3, S4 can fertilize. But if it's S1, S2, then S1 cannot fertilize, but S3 can. And if it's S1, S2, then S1, S2 cannot fertilize. But self-incompatibility processes can be really problematic for farmers if they plant a single variety of fruit with very similar genetics. So then there would be no fruit produced because there would be no pollination of the flowers. So genetics must be sufficiently different in fruit varieties. So for example, different varieties of apples, many of them are related. And so if you were planting an entire field of the same type of apples, let's say Granny Smith apples, then they potentially would not fertilize themselves and other plants. And as a byproduct, you'd end up with no apples. Okay, so if we are looking at insect pollinated flowers, many flowers they arose with insects at the same time. And so as a byproduct, they have a mutualistic relationship, which means they're working together. Insects were the pollinators of the earliest flower, and then flowers differ based on their insect helpers. So bright colored flowers attract specific pollinators, and they might have like different color combos on them that can only be seen by insects as kind of landing strips. The smell of flowers is appealing to their specific pollinators. The pollen grains are sticky, so they will attach to the hairs of the pollinators, and also they're a good source of protein so that pollinators get a snack when they're coming to the plant. And then also in flowers, there are glands called nectaries that produce sugar solution as an energy source for their pollinators. And nectaries are deep within the flower, so they need to be reached for, and that causes the insect to wipe itself all up on its body on the anthers, which then rubs the pollen onto their bodies. So once an ovule has become fertilized, then seed dispersal is the factor, and seeds need to, so fertilization, pollination are not the same as seed dispersal. Seeds need to travel long distances from the parent so that when they germinate, they're not competing for resources with the parent plant or their siblings. And so there's a variety of ways that they can do it. They can fly on little wings. They can be ejected in like puff balls. They can stick to the fur of animals and move with them. They can be eaten and pooped out by animals or dropped. They can float in the water. So these are the ones that would stick on the hair of an animal. So the goal here is to just get them away from the parent plant so they're wider dispersed and they can grow without competition. So to summarize, plants reproduce sexually using male-female gametes, pollen, or ovules. Fertilization is the joining of those two gametes, and pollination is the movement of pollen to the stigma via wind or animals to make that fertilization process happen. Flowers have strategies to attract pollinators to make pollination and fertilization happen. And then flowers also have, or plants have strategies to prevent self-fertilizing so that they maximize genetic diversity. And then lastly, seed dispersal can happen by wind, animals, water, or ejection. Thank you very much. That's the end of this video. Thank you for watching.